Frank, thank you so much for this kind introduction. I also want to thank Nancy Menges for putting together this conference and the entire staff of the Center for Security Policy, Christine Brim, Ben Lerner, Dave Raboy, and the rest of the staff. I also want to thank Congressman Matt Salmon and Jeff Duncan for their leadership on this issue, and particularly Jeff Duncan on this wonderful piece of legislation countering the Iran presence in the Western Hemisphere. What I'm going to discuss now is how do I view Venezuela going at this time. I'm going to discuss the regional context in which events in Venezuela are taking place. And finally, I will discuss some policy prescriptions, particularly diplomatic policy prescriptions. So, as you all know, what is happening now in Venezuela is that Maduro won the election, namely the person who actually inherited the rule of the PSUV from Chavez, and there is a recount, but the Electoral Commission also approved a recount where they are going to count about 12,000 boxes, which is about 46% of the vote. What is interesting is that the commission for, the National Electoral Commission, they approved on the one hand they inaugurated Maduro, and on the other hand they said that they were going ahead with a recount. Now, what is the problem? The problem is if the recount eventually is decided in favor of Capriles, how can they remove one president and put another is not clear to me. But what is clear to me is that the CNE, the Electoral Council, is absolutely subjugated to the rule of Chavez, of Chavismo if you wish, and therefore Maduro is likely to stay in power. No question about it. But nonetheless, there are certain things that are happening here and we can see. Even if we accept the results announced by the National Electoral Council, the fact that scarcely a month after Chavez's death, his successor received far fewer votes than Chavez received in October. Chavez won by a 9% or 10%, and here Maduro wins only by 2%. And this is scarcely 3 or 4 months after Chavez actually swept the gubernatorial elections in Venezuela. Basically 20 governorships, 20 states are in the hands of the party of Hugo Chavez, whereas only 3 states are in the hands of the opposition. So all of a sudden, the April 14th elections take place, and even if we accept this result, we are seeing a far narrow margin of that Maduro actually won by a far narrow margin. Now, what happened here? And this is my view. 2 things happened. On the one hand, the charisma is not there, and I think Chairman Salmon actually related to it, and he's right. The charisma is not there. Remember that Hugo Chavez had a tremendous ability to provide what is called a living promise. That means despite the fact that the economy was in very bad shape, and despite the fact that there was big debt and food shortages and inflation and so on and so forth, still the personality of Chavez was able to attract people and be popular particularly among the poor people. However, once this charisma disappears, Maduro will have to deliver the goods. That means we'll have to work hard to make sure that the economy goes in the right way, and he has to make sure that he rules properly. This is unlikely to happen. This is unlikely to happen. But there is a second element that was lost in this election, and that's the element of intimidation. Hugo Chavez's personality was able to intimidate the opposition. And if you compare the way in which Capriles ran his campaign in October for the October election and the way he ran it now for the April election, you see now a Capriles that is by far more courageous. And not only that he's more courageous and confronts Maduro, he seems not to even have much respect for Maduro. With Chavez, he was kind of like a pussycat. All of a sudden, this is changing. And not to speak about the fact that after the election is over, the opposition declares here there was fraud. not a rumor, that is not simply a propaganda. This is really, you know, the opposition said there has been fraud here, we demand a recount. That would not have happened under Chavez. So, two elements have been lost here, the charismatic element and the intimidation, the dimension of intimidation. And what this is going to generate a reaction on the part of Venezuelans, we are going to see Venezuelans being organized more and more against the government. Now, what would be the natural reaction of the government? I don't expect Maduro to react by being open to the opposition and inviting the opposition to sit. In fact, Maduro is going to react with violence. And I think the scenes that we saw last week in the General Assembly, where basically members of the opposition were hit by the Chavistas, while Diosdado Cabello, the president of the General Assembly, was laughing, is a clear indication of the way the government is going to react. In other words, there is going to be violence, or at least the possibility there is going to be violence is high. I don't see Maduro responding by calling to a dialogue or inclusion. Therefore, we are going to see the repressive apparatus increasing, and probably elections will be eliminated altogether, because only Chavez could sustain the element of elections. I don't think Maduro can sustain it, neither Cabello. Therefore, I think it's going to be a more repressive regime, and if the regime becomes repressive, they have all the advantages. And the advantages that they have is what they have done in the last 14 years, namely co-opting the military. Today, 800 officers were purged in the Venezuelan military. So that means if those expect that the military will stand with the people, I think is an illusion. Don't expect that. I don't think this is going to happen. In addition, Chavez counts with paramilitary. A lot of paramilitary people have been recruited in the last 14 years. And finally, they control PDVSA, all the main resources. They can fire people and hire people and buy people and bribe people, everything they want. And therefore, I think they have a tremendous advantage on their side. So that means if we accept what Chairman Matt Salmon said, let's watch and see, Venezuela will collapse on its own. It may collapse on its own, but they may perpetuate, there might be a situation here where the authoritarian rule of Hugo Chavez or Chavismo is going to be perpetuated forever, and that is not a good situation. Now, there is a second element by which I think the Maduro government can get more support or continuity, if you wish, and that is the international context. If you look at what happened a day after Maduro was recognized as the new elected president of Venezuela, the group called UNASUR, which is UNASUR is basically a South American organization aimed at regional integration. They convened in Lima within 24 hours, and they declared Maduro the winner. They decided to recognize Maduro as the winner, even though at the same time they supported the recount. In other words, they became accomplices of the Electoral Council. Mainly, we recognize Maduro, but at the same time we recognize we support the recount. Eventually they were giving their support, they were throwing their support behind Maduro. Now, what is happening in the regional context, I think, is extremely important. Because, and I think the main country responsible for the support of Hugo Chavez is no other than Brazil. And I'll tell you why. Because we know that we have countries of the ALBA, namely those countries that are associated with Chavez, like Ecuador, Nicaragua, Bolivia, and so on, Cuba. And then we have those countries that are what is called social democracies. I would say Brazil, Uruguay, and a few others. They also have supported, let's say, the government of Venezuela, because they believe that the left is a movement, and they don't distinguish between the extreme left, like Hugo Chavez, and the moderate left. And the reason why they don't distinguish, I think it has to do with the position of Brazil, and I will explain that. Brazil is a growing economy and is a growing power, not only in the region, is the most powerful, obviously, player in the region, but is also a growing power in the world. And they are looking for a place for themselves. And they have made a decision that they will conduct an independent foreign policy. And what they call to conduct an independent foreign policy is basically to have a policy that is not akin to the United States, but I would say even purposely having a policy that is contrary to the US policy. We have seen a couple of years ago when Brazil, along with Turkey, tried to cut a deal with Iran. If you remember, how many minutes do I have?
If you could wrap up quickly.
Wrap up? Yes, I just started.
This is not okay. Fidel Castro.
All right, all right. Fidel Castro is 7 hours, so that's good. And Brazil also has seen the victory of Chavez as crucial to the regional integration of the area. I don't understand how that happened, because regional integration is supported by even conservative governments, such as the Mexican, the Colombian, the Chilean, and so on and so forth. So, but they believe that the regional integration must be integration of the left. Not only that, they view the election or the competition between Capriles and Chavez back in October as the competition between right and left. So they call Capriles the candidate that represents the right, even though Capriles was running on a platform, Lulismo. Mainly, he was running on a platform that adopted the socialist model or the social democratic model of Brazil. So Brazil is playing a very negative role in support, has played a very negative role in supporting Chavez, and it has also influenced the OAS. The OAS, the Organization of American States, has not respected so far the democratic charter of the OAS, and they have been very selective. For instance, they failed to recognize fraud in Nicaragua, even though it was open. Yes.
I'm going to have to interrupt you because we're going to get into more of the region here momentarily, but if you could just stitch it together, finalize it, and
so stop. I will finalize. Bottom line, Brazil is playing a negative role in supporting Chavez, partly because of the Workers' Party. The Workers' Party is very much pro-Chavez, not necessarily the President Rousseff. The policy prescription that I would say that is important is the United States should take the lead now and not just watch events in making sure that the democratic charter of the OAS is respected, and in addition should cultivate Brazil more than it is doing now. I think Brazil has a tremendous potential to be a partner of the United States because it's a growing economy, it's a growing democracy, and eventually can play a role exactly like the European Union. But it's going in the direction of the third world, it's going in the direction of all these radical movements that are coming up in Latin America. So I think the United States should cultivate Brazil and should take more leadership in the Organization of American States. I'll be more than happy to give more details during the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Luis.
Sorry.
Frank, and thanks, Nancy, for holding this event. Very important. I'm going to talk a bit about asymmetric warfare as practiced by Hugo Chavez, of course, before his passing, and his allies and successors in the region, as well as Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and even Bashar Assad in Syria and their allies in the Middle East. This is often classified as a military doctrine, which it is, but about 90% of it is non-kinetic or non-military, and it's that non-kinetic portion that has been developed and become fairly sophisticated over the last decade as Chavez and Fidel Castro have honed it in the region. For a little background on asymmetric warfare as practiced there mostly, in 2004 Hugo Chavez held what he called the first military conference on fourth generation and asymmetric warfare in Caracas, and when he brought his military together and brought some speakers there, and what he did was ask his military to change their paradigm of military doctrine and their thinking from a conventional type of warfare to one of a people's war, as they call it. And this is the genesis of the title of my book. This was originally a doctrine by General Giap in Vietnam that later Fidel Castro picked up in the 70s and developed it in his military and his militias in Cuba. And from there, of course, Hugo Chavez developed it. But this also coincided about the same time as one of Hugo Chavez's idols, Carlos the Jackal, came out and converted to Islam while he was in jail in a French prison, and wrote a book called Revolutionary Islam, and where he venerated Islamic martyrs and things like that. But I brought a copy, or Doug actually brought me a copy of this. This is the book that Chavez adopted for his military, and when he converted his military to this mode of thinking, this is called Revolutionary Islam, or excuse me, Peripheral Warfare and Revolutionary Islam, and it's written by a Spanish socialist or ideologue, as they call him, that developed this doctrine. And it's not only, it talks about things even from how to build a dirty bomb, and the fact that how wonderful are Islamic revolutionaries, because they're willing to die for the cause in the service of the La Revolution, which is to them an international movement. And not only is this a kinetic doctrine, not only is it a non-kinetic doctrine, but it's besides the fact that they developed things like how to manipulate elections, not only in Venezuela, but also they've spread cash around in Venezuelan oil money to their allies in the surrounding countries. But they've also developed a very robust propaganda network that people rarely talk about and is very rarely noticed. But even as far back as 1982, Fidel Castro with Muammar Gaddafi in Libya set up what was called Al-Mataba, which is the Arabic name, but also called the Anti-Imperialism Center in Tripoli. And what this set up to do was to spread propaganda, to not only develop propaganda, but to collate and coordinate propaganda, not just in the region of Latin America, but as well as the Middle East. And just to give you some examples of that, just to see how this still goes on today, I brought just some headlines that it seems like it would be perfectly normal in any Middle Eastern publication. Israel launches Nazi-style operation against Palestinians in Gaza. 177 children in Lebanon murdered by Israeli attacks. The indignation grows throughout the world and will not cease until an end is put to the Holocaust suffered by the Lebanese and Palestinian people. Now, that would be the normal headline in any Middle Eastern paper. Those are all from Granma, the Cuban state propaganda organ. And so the quote is from Ricardo Alarcón, which was one of Fidel Castro's right-hand men. When Iran announced Hispan TV, which is this new rash of international satellite propaganda networks, there's Press TV from Iran that started out. There's Telesur that covers Venezuela, started and covers a lot of the allies in Latin America. But when they announced Hispan TV, they did it in a joint press announcement with Cuba. So this was Iran dealing with Cuba, and it's also worth noting that I think it was in late 90s, Castro sent Cubans to Iran to help set up these zakat committees, which are their means of delving out or delivering goods, foodstuffs, and things to the poor within Iran, because it builds dependence and it allows them to better control the population. Because once you become dependent on this, it also is a retail vote buying scheme. So that was a joint project with Cuba as well. I'm trying to establish here a little bit of the importance. We've got it. This is the first time in over a decade that we've had some kind of opening here and opportunity to not only to actually do the right thing for the majority of voters in Venezuela, who I think voted against Chavismo and against Bolivarian socialism, and actually possibly make an effect not only in Venezuela, but once you affect Venezuela, you affect the rest of the hemisphere as well, and possibly even a lot of this network that extends into the Middle East. But I brought some visual aids here. It was last week when I was deciding what I was going to speak about here that I read an article that Roger Noriega, who's going to speak in the second panel, I believe, published in the Miami Herald, and he mentioned about how he got very detailed explanations of how they manipulated and won the election for Nicolas Maduro. And it reminded me, I said, I've seen that name before, and I'll touch on it in a minute, but for the last 5 years just traveling in Latin America, in 2008 I went to a conference in Caracas, This is just it was a 20th anniversary of a free market think tank there, and it brought people like Mario Vargas Llosa, the Nobel laureate, to speak. There was the keynote speaker. And they stopped him and his son Alvaro in the airport in Caracas and searched their computers, caused an international incident. And by the time we left there, they were trying to challenge Chavez to a televised debate between him and Mario Vargas Llosa, which he acted for a couple of days like maybe he'd actually do it, but of course decided against it. But these right here are, I collected these as we walk into the hotel. There's these protesters outside passing these out. And so this is Jorge Castañeda. I assume most of you probably know who he is on TV all the time. A very centrist person, not a big derechista or anything, but they attack him, calling him a lacayo, a lackey of the empire, things like that. Mario Vargas Llosa, they put propaganda about him. But 2 weeks ago, this is 5 years later, I'm in Buenos Aires, Argentina at a similar conference, and I collect this while we're walking to another part of the conference. Exactly the same cutouts, the same type of propaganda. And so I start digging. This is a Cuban website. They're talking about the Cuban Five, which they love to propagandize about. That they're these. We framed them and put these five. They're actually Cuban spies that were spying here, and they get put in jail. But this is the same thing. They attack the main speakers, Mario Vargas Llosa, and all the same guys. But here's where when I started looking back at these, this is the Frente Francisco de Miranda is the group that put these out. And I was reading Roger Noriega's article. It's very detailed, and he and Martin get some of the best information out of there that I've ever seen. But the quote is, "The complex vote rigging system was created in the last several years under the direction of Cuban advisors working with Cuban-trained Venezuelan hardliners associated with the Francisco de Miranda Front and micromanaged by a database operating in Pinar del Rio, Cuba." So this is the same people that 5 years ago were putting out propaganda for this benign conference we had in Caracas. Are doing the same thing. They travel, they bring Venezuelans to Cuba, train them in propaganda, in vote rigging, and terrorism actually still these days as well. So I thought it would open up to you, I'd give a good X-ray into this network that goes on. I also want to stress that as Syria right now is the linchpin in the Middle East against Iran, where we have some opportunity. Actually, a year and a half ago, we had a much better opportunity. We're still in that phase with Venezuela to actually affect not just that country, who is causing problems not only to us, but to everybody else in the region, that it's presenting a very good opportunity to do something. This is the first time in more than a decade we've had that opportunity, not only to help us, but to help the majority of Venezuelans that voted against Chavismo. And one of the main things we can do is simply show leadership and with our allies in the region and ask for a valid and a proper recount. And I think President Obama was traveling in the region last week and actually made good statements backing this up, and everybody's kind of held fast lately, but I don't think time is on our side, and I worry that the way Capriles is handling it and some of the other allies in the region, that we may need to slightly pressure a little bit more our allies in the region to stand for the same thing. It's not a lot to ask. A proper recount will determine it one way or the other, and it'll actually possibly help the Maduro regime. If they actually won, it gives them legitimacy. If they do an actual proper recount, they can claim that, yeah, they're legitimate, yes, they won. But because Venezuela State Oil Company is no longer, if this happens, if Maduro falls, and if PDVSA, the Venezuelan State Oil Company, is no longer a lifeline to Cuba, then the entire infrastructure of terrorism, of narco-trafficking, and all this propaganda network, everything begins to fall. And I think this is the first chance we've had in a while to make that happen. And I don't think we should be shy or timid about doing that. And let me conclude by saying that I think it's great that Congressman Duncan came here. He's not been in Congress that long, and he's the only one that I know of that has taken the initiative to put something like the legislation he did about making the State Department even come up with a plan for checking Iran's activities in the region. And once the Venezuelan regime possibly falls, or is at least stunted a bit, as well as the Cuban, a lot of that problem is going to get solved by itself. But I just want to thank not only Congressman Duncan, but everybody else I know at the Center for Security Policy that helped him along with that legislation. And I think it's a proper way to do it. And I thank him. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you very much. What I'm going to do now is
our colleagues in the panel has been talking on a very good details, but I want to take you to some facts of what the problem, for example, in this specific case, Iran, Hezbollah in Latin America and the other countries, but what is left behind Chavez? People assume when Chavez left, well, we're in better shape because Chavez is gone, but sadly, that's not the situation. The situation is Chavez dead, but the whole problem he created during 14 years still there and growing, and the people he left in power, which is led now by Maduro, unfortunately are the worst people in his team. The people who respond to basically Cuba, Russia, and Iran. And regarding Iran, Hezbollah activities in Venezuela, which most of the audience already knows, and a lot of my colleagues has done a great work analyzing and investigating all these phenomena in the region. What we have found, particularly in Venezuela, there are very disturbing activities that I want to walk you through, and I will be focused on this presentation only on the financial sector and terrorism support. We will not go through what the other Iran activities in Venezuela are, which are many, but trying to be focused precisely in this area. Well, the threat, many people already know, Iran in Venezuela has been already for 7 years creating a large network of entities and activities, but they go from the military sector to many other activities. But as I said a few seconds ago, the most important one has been the financial sector. The financial sector, Iran has found in Venezuela an opportunity where they cannot find actually in any other country today to get access to a financial sector who have in Venezuela, because the oil industry access to the world financial institutions. And that has not only been used by Hezbollah, by Iran, but we have seen now that infrastructure being used by Hezbollah as well as Syria too. Even Syria, and the current situation under the sanction, has been taking advantage of that infrastructure who was created. By our personal experience, we know the US government has been working on this problem for a while, the US Treasury, as well as different law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies. But I think there is still a lot of work to do in this regard. I will try to go very close on this presentation, very fast on this presentation, because the lack of time we have, and even that we reduce the amount. But basically, this problem was created between the Iran-Venezuelan alliance, who was created, as I say, after 2005 between Ahmadinejad and Hugo Chavez, and how this has been developed using PDVSA. This is an important key component of this relation, because PDVSA owns Citgo in the United States. Part of that financial infrastructure created by Iran in Venezuela has been taking advantage of the PDVSA financial infrastructure and the access they do have in the United States financial system. The problem today, as we see it, is Venezuelan Hugo Chavez brought different kind of problem to one place that were already there, but under his regime the growth was significantly dangerous, which is basically narco traffic from FARC and Mexican drug cartels, Iran, Russian mafia, China mafia, and Hezbollah, and another Middle Eastern terrorist group that came to Venezuela, and there has been able, including the ETA from Spain. When you look at that, and it's very difficult to understand how different entities and terrorist and criminal organizations has been able to assemble and participate on that system very effectively. The relationship, the projects, and the platform that is described here is basically what I have allowed, but I will try to go how the Iranian government uses the Venezuelan companies. We have detected at least 176 Iranian companies created in Venezuela in the last 5 years. When you look into those companies, most of those companies exist only on paper, others exist in physical terms, but when you're trying to look into real business of those entities, They are not, but the financial activities of those companies has been very, very effective. This financial relation started with the Banco Internacional de Desarrollo. It's a universal bank created in Venezuela by Iran, owned by Banco Tosilleta Saderat. Ambassador Noriega and myself, we have the opportunity recently to sit with the people at the U.S. Treasury and the OFAC to discuss a lot of this situation going on together with the District Attorney Office of New York. And one of the problems we addressed to the U.S. Treasury was, for example, they imposed sanction on this Banco Internacional de Desarrollo. Well, they prohibited this bank to do business in dollars and to do business with U.S. entities. Well, that bank wasn't created to do that anyway. That bank was created to do business in bolivars with Venezuelan entities that can do business with the U.S. entities and can do business in dollars.
Kevin Zimmerman, I'm the president of the Foundation for Democracy in Iran. Martin, can you give us a little bit more detail of the involvement of U.S. banks and U.S. companies in this network for PDVSA?
Can you use this? Yes. I will use an example, both to make it easier to explain the situation. An investigation we participate with the District Attorney Office of New York back 2 years ago. We found that there were Venezuelan bankers who were doing money laundering on behalf of certain groups in Venezuela that were connected to the FARC, to Mexican drug cartels, as well to Hezbollah. We were trying to find how those people were able to manage to collocate those funds into the United States financial system, specifically Bank of America. And in the investigation, we found this banker were able to create a company who supposedly provides services and sells goods to PDVSA through a subsidiary of PDVSA in Houston, Texas, called Bariben. And when we went further in the investigation, we found that those transactions, they were supposedly for sale of drills for the oil business that came supposedly from Oklahoma to Venezuela, never were delivered. The sale never happened. But the payments from PDVSA, indeed, was done for $66 million to this company in Houston owned by the banker. Well, what we found later was the money who was coming, those $66 million payments from PDVSA, were not related to any real business, to oil business. It was payments of PDVSA, a money laundering system created by PDVSA, where they take the money either for Iran or for FARC in Venezuela, and they channel through their financial system. They made the payment in the US for contracts that doesn't exist, and this money then is taken by those guys to Bank of America. When Bank of American due diligence happens, they ask, well, where this money is about? And the simple is, there is a contract with PDVSA for, I sold some drills to PDVSA. Well, the drills never happened. There is no even invoices for the delivery for anything, but the payment happened. Bank of America stopped there. They will not go further because there's a payment from an account by Bariben, PDVSA subsidiary in Houston, for $66 million. And then what the banker was doing is he was doing the distribution of the $66 million for the entities that are part of the network. This is an example that helps to explain what this is one of the way they do it, but we are sure there are many others, like the PDVSA bonds, for example.
So the money was never blocked?
Never was blocked. Money was distributed and paid.
Did you have a question, sir?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm Russell King, and I'll direct this question to Mr. Perdue about the asymmetric warfare and the collusion between Cuba and Venezuela. But I was wondering, is there such a thing as weather control, sabotage warfare, or offshore oil rig attacks, covert attacks on offshore oil rigs, or geothermal attacks that could possibly be based in Cuba? Because it seems geographically that is a perfect location as a base to do that sort of thing.
Now, they've accused us, you realize, of causing storms and earthquakes to cause havoc in Venezuela before. But look, the best thing that's happened in Cuba recently is Repsol and several other companies have tried to drill for oil off the coast there and have failed. But as far as that, you're getting into an area that's above my my clearance level, let's say, that anybody's doing anything like that. But although we've been accused of doing it to them numerous times, I can't address it any further than that.
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Yes. Hi, Angel Cavazza from the RAND Corporation, and congratulations to all the speakers for fantastic presentations. The quick question is looking to the future. And Martin mentioned that Iran was not very heavily involved in Venezuela until about 2005, and that is because Chavez and Ahmadinejad developed this very close personal relationship. I mean, so close that Ahmadinejad took Chavez to Mashhad, to the tomb of the fifth Imam, I believe, and got into all kinds of criticism from the clergy. So now Chavez is gone. Maduro may not be as committed as Chavez to this global vision that Chavez had. Ahmadinejad is on the way out, and his faction is out of favor with the clerical establishment. So who knows who's going to replace him, but it's going to be someone who's not likely to follow the same line. So what's going to happen to this relationship in view of the disappearance of the two key actors? And maybe Frank may have some thoughts on this.
Well, we have a whole panel that's going to be talking about the future here in a moment, so you might want to bear with us. But Martin, you want to say a quick word on where you think this goes?
Yeah, well, it's just true that Ahmadinejad is going out and his faction is in favor of the clerics, but the presence in Venezuela is the IRGC, basically, which is not Ahmadinejad, and those are the people in control of the network. Even if he is gone and he is a situation and his personal relation he created with Hugo Chavez will not be there anymore, I will think that the IRGC will do their best of what they can to sustain that network working.
Let's take just one more question. I think there was another one back there. Yes, sir.
Kyle Schuyler down with Middle East Truth, and my question is along the same lines, but I wanted to ask, to the extent that this narco state exists in the infrastructure and apparatus, to what extent are those individuals down for the cause? Are they profit-based? Do we have any hope of seeing infighting over profits and positions, or are they ideologically aligned and they're prepared to take this global struggle forward? I guess that's kind of my question. To any of the panel that has a thought.
In most of these, throughout from Panama when Noriega was there to Nicaragua when Daniel Ortega was there the first time to Venezuela now, it tends to be the military that gets set up to run these things. A lot of them are just trying to maximize profit before the regime falls or before something happens. So it's a mechanism that is almost self-perpetuating to keep the people that are in the military already has the infrastructure, already has the hierarchy. So there's not that much room for knocking off the head as you would in a mafia or a drug trafficking organization. But it tends to have its own self-sustaining apparatus if you set it up that way. But you get some, like Luis said, they purged 800 the other day, and they've had all these Cubans that they'll put a soccer trainer with a military unit, and his job is to act like he's training soccer, but it's to report on those that are disloyal to the Chavez regime. And so they've been doing this for a decade now, so they've cleared out a lot of the non gung-ho, as you'd say in the military, toward Chavismo. So it's fairly easy to have pseudo ideologically adherent people at the top, but the structure's already there, the money is flowing in, nobody's going to buck the system when it's set up that way.
I want to echo what my predecessor, the other speaker said. Yes, the fact that Chavez is no longer there, that doesn't mean that it's not a threat. Whether it's the Iranian infrastructure or whether it's the narco infrastructure, there are too many interests that have been created And that reminds me a little bit of the speech that was delivered by Khrushchev to the Politburo after Stalin died. It was like a big deal, and some people thought that there is going to be a big change, but eventually there was some change, but nothing really fundamental. So I think we should continue to look at Maduro or at the Bolivarian Revolution, and now it's going to be even worse. Because if what we had here, let's say in the last several weeks, is a sort of Prague Spring, the only response that these people are going to have, the regime, is not to be flexible, but the opposite, radicalize the revolution. And Maduro actually referred to the fact, we are going to radicalize the revolution, and he spoke about revolution within a revolution, which is like a phrase taken from Brigitte Debray back 50 years ago, 50-something years ago. I think, yes, and by the way, the idea that the reduction of the oil price is going to bring about the collapse is a myth, because revolutionary will goes well above the issue of oil. I mean, you can have a revolutionary regime with all the international implications that is poor. I mean, think about Cuba. So you don't need the oil to sustain a regime like that. So, but what we need is not just to wait and see, which is what Chairman Salmon said. We need to really mobilize the people, and I think democracy, promoting democracy at least is one way of putting some sort of stop to the Bolivarian Revolution. That doesn't mean that we'll solve all the problems, but at least we'll put some stop. But we are not thinking, we are not doing anything at this point.
Well, we're going to be thinking and talking about it considerably more momentarily. Thank you very much. I ask all of you to join me. Appreciate it. All right, gentlemen, we'll vacate these seats. I think because we're running late, I apologize for doing this, because the temptation is to take a break, but then everybody mills around and doesn't get back anything remotely on time. So if you have to go someplace else, but stick with us if you can. And those of you who are on the next panel, come on up, please, and I'll introduce you right now. Thank you guys very much. I think there is one right out here, but I don't know. Why don't you sit here? Michael, let's put you in the middle. Doug will be at the end. So Roger right here.